Her Ducati is just too darn slow. She's a speed freak, even though she didn't use the word speed freak. She needs an even faster one. She's the Senior Vice President of Global Sales at CoachHub. Juliane Sterzl, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Paul. Pleasure to be here.
So I shortchanged you there, apart from the speed freak thing, and I apologize for calling you a freak. You're absolutely not. You're a lover of speed. Would you please introduce yourself properly?
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Juliane Sterzl. I specialize in running revenue function of high growth scale-ups. So currently working for CoachHub. Before that, I was working in various commercial leadership roles for various corporates based out of London before actually making a move across to Berlin about 5 years ago.
Beautiful part of the world, that. When in that illustrious career did you first end up actually having to manage other people? Because that's where the Ducati rubber hits the road. And you stop just being good at what you do, and you have to not only be good at what you do, you have to actually be good at people.
Yeah, I actually remember the moment pretty well. It was in 2012 at a company called Gartner, which sells market intelligence across various tech topics, if you like. And it was there that I was promoted to run a selling into a high-tech industry. So if you like startups, scale-ups all across Europe, to actually equip them with information and insights that Gartner produced. So if you know the magic quadrants, if you know the hype cycles, all of that good stuff. I actually had the privilege of working with many founders and leaders from wide range of different industries, scale-ups, etc., and to actually help them along that road in terms of identifying the right ways to scale up their business, their go-to-market, but also, again, to equip them with the right information and connect them to the right people at the right time. So that to me was fascinating, in addition to obviously learning how to lead people, many learnings along the way for sure. But that was indeed the very first time.
So why were you promoted?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's always a balance there between being a good performer, but I don't think being the best performer is necessarily giving you the best foundation for always being a good leader. I think it's the ability to take a step back and to actually invest into other and to make sure that they're successful. So at the time, I was mentoring a lot of people, a lot of new AEs. And they, in turn, turn out to be successful and go off to have great sales careers. And I think that potential was spotted, and I got the opportunity to lead it.
It's a great question that you ask. It's like a two-part question. If you're asking a new manager, you're going to hire a manager, it's how many people who've worked for you in the past, or even better, in your last job, how many people came with you? Right?
Yeah.
Of course, you're not allowed to poach people, all that stuff. But in reality, how many people? And if you're talking to somebody and they brought a team of 10 people with them, you know they've got some good chops. When you then are talking to you currently run a team of several hundred people around the world, and you get managers all over the place. When you're talking to them, what's the one thing that comes up most often? What's the one bit of advice that you end up? What's your go-to?
Yeah, I think it's all about knowing your team. So for me, actually understanding what drives individuals is incredibly important, because that is the foundation, right, of how you motivate. So if you know what somebody cares about, and also on the flip side, what somebody is perhaps less keen on or perhaps less inclined to do, right, you really understand how to motivate your team. And I think motivation and drive goes a long, long way, even if perhaps there are still some gaps in skill set in terms of areas for development. If somebody has that drive, that energy to really go out there, right, and absolutely smash it, then that to me is the key. So understanding your team, but also picking up on things that perhaps aren't going well and addressing them early, I think is key. So don't just sit there and hope for things to improve, right? If you notice something and pick up on something, but proactively go out and address it and say it, even if it can be a little bit uncomfortable at the time. I think that's absolutely vital.
Yeah, there's no time like the present for fixing the problems that are going to come tomorrow.
Yes.
There you are. All right, I like that. Now, following on from that, so that's kind of your go-to watch outs. Congratulations on your new job. By the way, make sure you're actually taking care of are in your care. Your job is there to make them, so you can't do that unless you actually know who they are and what they care about themselves. What's the biggest how-to that what's the thing that you would say you really need to know at its foundation? How to...
To me, it's about how to map out a plan of getting the person, the team, which in effect also are the results, right, to the point where they need to be, whether that's at the end of the year or at the end of a 3-year plan or whatever it may be. I think it's really important to have the goal in sight and to actually work your way backwards and map out all the steps that are necessary and needed to get there, right? And it's always that combination of, hey, having the right numbers, of course, right? We're in a numbers business, but also making sure that, again, you have the right team set up and the right structure to make that happen, because time flies, right? Before you know it, hey, that 1 year is gone, those 2 years have passed. So I think, again, knowing what to do and knowing that you have the right KPIs and the right measurements to ensure that you're on track is absolute.
So it's a combination of planning and decision making.
Yes, absolutely.
If there was one message that you could share around the world, if you had your 10,000 billboards and a big marker, what would you put on it? How would you simplify, clarify, boil down to the 6 words a line and visible from 60 feet or whatever it is?
Yeah, I love the question. I mean, to me, it's all about making the right decisions at the right time. So we are faced with a lot of decisions that we need to make, right? As commercial leaders, as leaders in a very fast moving industry, right? There's developments all the time coming out. You see it on the news, right? Like there's a lot happening. But it also means that, again, as senior leaders, you are the ones who have to make those decisions, and having the right conditions there and the right framework and the right infrastructure in place to make those decisions is, and I think to me, it's one of the areas that we often ignore because, hey, we're under time pressure. There's lots happening. You're facing different demands from different stakeholders, different opinions, right? But at the end of the day, we have to make the right decisions to have successful businesses. So that area to me is absolutely vital and one that I think is worth investigating more.
So you're asking, you're trying to make the right decisions at the right time. Make the right decisions at the right time. Trademark, Juliane Sterzl. Okay, that's pretty good. I can see that on a big billboard there. But to make the right decisions, you need to make the right decisions. You need the right inputs. Then you need the right logical processes. You need to understand your biases. You need to understand that 90% of what people are telling you they think is true but isn't actually. You need to understand that all models are wrong, that spreadsheets are worth exactly what they're written on, which is zeros and ones and not much else. How do you then go about asking the right question to make the right? What's the journey that you need to go through?
To me, it's all about asking the right questions, because having information right now is becoming more of a commodity, right? So if you think about the search engines and now the development of AI, getting information is a lot easier, right? It's probably the easiest it's ever been in a very short period of time. But then phrasing the right questions and actually ensuring that you are asking in the right way, that becomes even more important. And to me, that can be a real differentiator between, again, having the right access to information, but also at the end of the day, being a competitive differentiator to organizations looking to. So when I think about it in the real world, right, again, we're facing a lot of conflicting demands sometimes from different stakeholders. Sometimes there's a lack of information, right? There's a limited time span as well. You're under pressure to make decisions fast because everybody wants to know, hey, are we going left? Are we going right? So actually making sure that you create the right infrastructure to actually ask those questions is, so I think the first thing to think about is what kind of bias, if any, do we have in phrasing the question? Can the question be phrased and reframed perhaps in a different way that would lead to a different outcome? So I think that's the first question to ask. I think then the question becomes, well, who do we involve in that process and what is the process? Do we all get around a table and have a discussion? Now, statistically, that actually leads to the worst outcome. So if everybody comes around, right, and we all have a conversation around perhaps a new product development, that actually isn't the best way to go about it. So I spent a little bit of time recently doing a course at INSEAD, so a big thank you there as well to everybody who put that together on strategic decision making, because that topic is something that is close to my heart. And to me, one of the key takeaways there was really to make sure that eliminate some of the things that can go wrong in that process. So it could be about, again, asking the right questions, but also identifying, do we have somebody in the room who knows more about this topic than somebody else? Now, typically what you find is you have one or two people who are very confident, right? They can dominate the room. Yeah. They can give out their opinions, right? And sometimes they drown out the people who may know a little bit more about the topic, but perhaps are less confident to speak. And so to ensure that these people speak up, I think it's key that everybody prepares their input and that you start with the most junior person speaking up first to avoid this kind of bias, this group think, if you like. If the most senior person starts speaking, the barrier becomes a lot harder to disagree and to come up with something else at that point.
So you've got the hippo. It's the highest paid person's opinion complex. Yeah, I always tell managers, leaders, execs, when you facilitate a meeting or something like that, it says that, shh, you don't get to speak. Oh, but you certainly don't get to have an opinion. You don't even get to raise your eyebrows. Sit still, thank people. Okay. So we've got strategic decision making. We've got the ability to ask the right questions. We're paying attention to our own biases. We're paying attention to the makeup of the people in the room. Do we have the right people on the bus? Collins says we have the right people on the bus. We want to avoid our statistically poor way of groupthink rattling around a table. Now, you went off to do a course at INSEAD, beautiful campus down there, a lovely time. What did you learn? What was the takeaway? Give us a short course. I'm not going to go off and spend that sort of money. I'm here listening to a free podcast with you. Give us a cheat sheet.
Yeah. To me, it really hammered home the importance of failing fast early. And what I mean by that is getting people proactively to disagree with you and to, again, test different options and different ideas, but to do it in a means that you try the most difficult thing first. So there's that concept of a monkey, and it's called the monkey first principle. And it was, I think it was actually originated by Google X, where they tried to do the most difficult thing first, which is teaching a monkey to speak. And the second thing they were going to do is put it on a pedestal. And they do that last because that is the easier thing to do. So as opposed to building the pedestal first and then teaching monkey how to speak, the idea was about teaching the monkey to speak first, because if that is not possible, forget about the rest. But in reality, right, what happens a lot of the time is that you go off, you do something, you want to show some successes. It's very natural, right? We want to go off, do a project, show how well it's doing, right? And then, hey, we sometimes leave the most difficult things to the end. And then it becomes very costly, right, to fail and to actually recall, change direction, change course, and do something else altogether. So to me, getting people to try different things and inviting proactive disagreement, as uncomfortable as it may be in the beginning, is something that is a definite learning, which I've taken away and which I've even more realized the importance of, right? Of doing that process to then get out all the disagreement, get out all the different ideas, and then, hey, get together closer to the end of the process with an agreed way forward, right? But also not forgetting that, hey, sometimes failing fast will cost you some money. And so you do need to factor in a little bit of time and a little bit of sunk cost, right? And not be afraid to actually own up to things and say, hey, listen, actually, I've changed my thought around this. I've changed my plan, changed my idea. Let's do something else now instead, because that is the right for the business where it stands today. So don't be afraid to say, hey, I've changed my opinion. We're going in this direction.
I've worked with quite a few different types of leader, and a lot of times the founder, the CEO and they are always astonished or dismayed as soon as you put a bunch of salespeople who tend to be kind of more arty or humanities type folk, because they're people, right? So the engineers, the techs, not so good at talking to folk. And then they see how poorly decisions are made, astonished, because the engineers go for the scientific principle, which is you have a hypothesis. My job is to refute it. It's to try and break it. And that's what every good scientist does. They have an idea. Oh, this is a brilliant idea. Let's see if I can break it and make it wrong. Because the minute you try and prove something right, you can. You prove it by finding whatever data you want to find. You find whatever stories or anecdotes or non-empirical proof or even empirical proof that your thing worked. And that's just the road to ruin, disaster. I love the monkey story. Trying to teach a monkey to recite Shakespeare standing in a pedestal. And you try and build the pedestal first because you want to show your boss that you're busy. Unfortunately, the monkey's there, not quite, just can't remember the Shakespeare. It's quite complicated, It's a great story. Okay, you talk about avoiding sunk costs. That, I think, is huge. I've seen that multiple. It's the sunk cost fallacy. Look, we've spent 3 million quid on this already. We can't not see it to an end. How do you avoid that?
Yeah, I think it's a super common mistake, right? Because once you've backed a certain project, you've put your name to it, right? You're saying, hey, listen, I'm leading this initiative or I'm pushing this ahead. And And you've, again, rallied around the troops, if you like. You've got the investment, you have the resources, right? You put people to work on it and it doesn't work. It's very difficult, right, in real life because, we were all real people, right? To say, hey, listen, I actually made a mistake. And actually, hey, we need to cut this. We need to cut our losses, if you like, and do something else. I mean, the reality is not making a decision is also a decision. So continuing to run with something, right, is often also the wrong thing to do if it's not going anywhere. And then at some point, you will need to make a judgment call, as difficult as it may seem. And sometimes that requires parking your ego at the door and saying, okay, hey, I was wrong, and I now have another idea or a better plan.
The thing is, you've made a mistake. You've pulled the plug on it, and now you come back and say, and now I've got a better plan. Well, as your colleague or as your boss, I'm thinking, but you just blew 3 million quid. Why am I going to give you a second chance? And that is what's going through your mind as you're worried about your sunk costs, your invested time, emotional energy in this project. It's your reputation. And in reality, I think it's probably 50-50. You'd like to think that good bosses would look at that and say, no, I respect Juliane's decision to pull the plug. That's the right decision to pull that plug. I think it's actually 50-50. 50% of people, 50% of the good managers are going to look at somebody and say, you know what? Well, that was an expensive but valuable learning experience as long as we learn from it. And I'm glad we stopped. And in reality, the other 50% will be going, surely we should just finish it now. We should bash on because we've sunk the cost, because they're going to be in the same boat. They're going to be exactly the same emotional space as you.
Yeah, 100%. I think a lot of it really depends on the company culture. And whether the company has a learning culture, right? If it is a culture whereby mistakes are punished, and again, I mean, in many, many companies, that's the case, right? It's very difficult for people to own up and to say, hey, actually, I've made a mistake, but that then prevents the company from improving, right? Or from, again, improving certain processes, challenging opinions, right? And so not having that culture also means that you are, to some degree, perhaps limiting your ability of succeeding when there's a lot of change, right? Whether it's in the industry or the kind of environment that you operate in. So having a culture, and I'm thinking here of, the likes of Tesla, right, where again, they fail fast as well. There's lots of examples there where they've invested significant amount of money, but also just to learn from some of the mistakes and, doing things in a completely different way. They've managed to be quicker, more agile through continuous iterations, right, of the process. So very different outcomes due to very different means of looking at failures, or whether you describe them as failures or learning opportunity, right? So it's a super interesting topic.
When you look at some of the biggest companies out there, you look at Amazon, and you remember the Fire phone? They tried putting a phone out. They must have spent $100 million. It was an absolute catastrophe. Pulled the plug, walked on, didn't rest for a minute. That sort of attitude it's unusual. It's unusual. Because if it was usual, there would be 500 Amazon, there'd be 500 ex-Google Teslas out there. The fact that there are only a few of these mega companies, and their attitude towards mistakes, their attitude towards experimentation, deliberate experimentation, is exactly what it is. Tells you everything you need to know. No?
Yeah.
So I did have a look at the course you went on a few months ago there, that decision-making course. And there's a chunk in it about AI. And I've got an opinion about AI. Of course, everybody's got it. My challenge with AI is that it's been taught and trained on human output. And we're astonished that AI is lying to us. At the bottom of the prompt box in all of these different systems, it says, the AI platform, GPT, Gemini, whatever it is, can make things up. We're surprised at this. Have you ever met another human being? That's what we do. We lie and make shit up all the time. And now you're talking about going and using it as a decision-making tool. I think as long as we treat it with the same skepticism that we treat the data and the inputs we're getting from our fellow humans, maybe our fellow not quite intelligent intelligences, if we treat them the same way, it's going to, I don't know, maybe that's a guide.
Yeah.
Where did you get to?
Yeah, I mean, the topic is super interesting because it is so new and so recent, right? And you see companies across the world scrambling to obviously investigate the benefits, but also looking at the risks of AI, right, from multiple different perspectives. And I think the role of AI in decision-making is super interesting because, to your point, those hallucinations, that it produces, and so thereby feeds back, right, wrong content, essentially, or incorrect information. But there's obviously some benefits here as well. And specifically what I'm thinking about here are the benefits of where the capability of AI exceeds that of human being. So when I think about large amounts of data and processing that, right, I mean, that is something that humans struggle with, right, in a very short period of time. So that is something whereby gathering input, gathering data points, right? That is something where you could arguably say AI exceeds that capability. But at the same time, we obviously do need to be careful not to over rely on it and say, hey, everything that ChatGPT spits out is the truth, and that's what we're going to base our decision on. But the concept of adding in an AI factor, perhaps if you like, a kind of stakeholder in the room to aid your decision-making process, I think is super interesting, because you have an opportunity there to get something that is unbiased and to use that input as a factor. So if you like, an additional puzzle, an additional key, right, add to your decision-making process, where, again, perhaps it's good to get an unbiased opinion in the room and not just people, right, or the same people that you've been dealing with. So this concept of getting someone or maybe something new into the room to get a different view or different lines of information, I think is incredibly valuable.
I'm not so sure. I'm just not so sure. I mean, the various large language model training platforms, they've been trained on the contents of the internet, which is, as I think very few people would disagree, absolute sewer.
Mm.
And the stuff that they've been trained on is inherently, deeply biased to one angle or other.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go back to the original challenges, some of the Apple iPhone apps were having, the original Apple things were having, they were impossible to be used by left-handed people. Why? Because it was only right-handed people who tested it. All the blokes, all the men who were doing because these horrible men who were doing all the coding were right-handed. Oops, the health app that came out, the original health app, didn't acknowledge that women had any sort of cyclical challenges these months. Nothing, weightlifting, sure as hell. So where it comes from is the biases that are actually built into this stuff that can be quite scary. So you're talking about having an independent angle. I experienced this. It was my boss at the time, lovely guy called Jack. He brought in an intern into a big strategic meeting we were having. Brought in the intern. Kid was 20-something years old and just said, this is what we're doing. This is how we're doing. What do you think? And the guy was like, I'm not speaking to all these bosses. And eventually he warmed up. And wow, that was an interesting thing. The diversity of thought, I think, is the challenge. Bringing diverse thoughts into a decision-making process. Mm-hmm.
I think that's absolutely right. And that's absolutely key. And they don't need to be experts either in the field. So when you think about a team, if everybody is kind of, has the same background, and I mean in the widest possible sense, whether that's industry experience or, the experience in a role, you have a certain view and a certain lens on things, but it also limits your opportunities to look at things in a completely different way.
Yeah.
So actually the importance of having diversity on the team, and again, diversity of thought, is so key, because you miss so many opportunities. And again, especially in the tech industry where innovation is key, right? Speed is key. You don't have a lot of time, right? We need to keep moving in order to stay competitive, or again, build out our competitive advantage. It is absolutely vital, right? To again, have somebody else come in. And that is definitely a takeaway from me as well, right? Sometimes just to get somebody in, bring somebody in with a completely different view, and again, get them in early and challenge thought processes, challenge concepts, challenge ideas, and to create that environment.
Is there a book or podcast or something that you recommend?
There is one. It was given to me actually just before I started my own leadership journey, and it is a very short book. It's called The Common Denominator of Success by Albert Gray, and I think it's fascinating because it takes you on a little journey about understanding what makes people successful. And it is not necessarily just hard work, right? So the message behind it is that, hey, actually, the keys to success is something that a lot of people don't like to do. It doesn't come to us naturally necessarily. It's not the easy, and we can work many, many hours doing the easy things. But sometimes we actually need to take a step back, have a look around, and actually look at some of the things that others don't like to do. And again, to me, looking at the way that we make decisions and having somebody come in and challenge you and inviting somebody else with, again, a different background, challenging your ideas, right? Challenging your lines of thought and owning up to failures and saying, hey, listen, we're going to do something else. That doesn't come easy, but that is the reason why, to me, that book really resonates, especially around this topic, because doing the things that others don't like to do, the uncomfortable things, is sometimes the thing that is necessary to succeed. And whether it's making decisions or whether it's picking up the phone and doing lots of cold calling, to me, that book has held, if you like, a certain value throughout the years as well, and in many, many different roles. So I definitely recommend.
Marvel. If you look back at the pre-Ducati Juliane, or maybe you've always had them. If you look back at the younger, what would you like to thank your younger self?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of it is around resilience, right? And sometimes you're doing all the things, and again, it's not nice to do, again, picking up the phone, doing lots of cold calling and all those things, right? Where you're thinking, oh, here we go, another hour, right? With people putting the phone down, right? That's how I think many of us start in sales, sticking to that, right? And sticking it out and seeing out the successes at the end. That is something that I think has made a difference to me personally, but it is also making sure that you know when to walk away when, things aren't right or things aren't heading in the right direction, to actually invest your energy in the right opportunities. And when you find the right opportunities, go all in.
And lastly, how can people find you, Juliane?
I am on LinkedIn, would love to connect. So if anybody's got any thoughts or experiences they'd love to share about how to make decisions, their own, again, experiences around decision making, especially in the tech industry, I'd love to speak to everybody. So keen to connect.
Good. Well, we'll put your LinkedIn into the description of this episode. All that remains for me to say is Juliane Sterzl. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paul.